Pop the hood. You're good. Pop the hood. Leave it running. So we think it's the alternator, which is right underneath there. We used a stethoscope. In the stethoscope, it was howling. We have a alternator we're changing on this Chrysler. You heard the noise, but this also has a belt that drives the alternator because it's not a hybrid, and so we need to remove that belt, the serpentine belt. It's called a serpentine belt. So this is a serpentine belt tool. So the different size sockets are for the belt tensioner. You got to make sure it's snug. You don't want to use the wrong one. Perfect. Look at that. So now I can take this off, and that's going to go into this tool right here. Okay. So that's this, and it's a ratcheting tool. Locks one way, ratchets the other. And then I'm going to use this extension. Okay, so there's a lot of other adapters depending on what belt tensioner you have. So I'm going to go ahead and put this on, and then if it's not going the right way, then I will flip the ratchet. So I'm going to stick that right up inside there, like that. And then I'm going to pull. Nope, the bolt's loosening. So I need to take this ratchet now. I take this ratchet and I need to flip it so it's going in the opposite direction. Change this socket to this side, and now I should be able to stick that up there, and you should see the good. So I need to ratchet a little more, so now I can take that belt off. So before I ever take this belt off, so we already have the right tool, I want to make sure I know how this belt is routed. Too many people just go and take the belt off, and you know, wow, does it go on this side of this pulley or on this side of this pulley? Does it go over this or under this? So we also need to pay attention to what drives what. So this is your crankshaft. It all starts here. The crankshaft's actually what spins it. Let's go in a counterclockwise fashion. So then we go over here. This pulley, you can see an air conditioning line. This is the air conditioning compressor. It goes around this and up and over the alternator. This is the alternator pulley right here. Comes down, goes around another pulley. This is just a idler pulley. It does nothing other than directs the direction of the belt. So it doesn't move, just spins. It's an idler pulley. That then goes up here to the top, which is a power steering pulley. It comes around the power steering pulley and goes to another pulley. This is just an idler pulley. Just like this is an idler pulley, this is an idler pulley, so they can route the belt where it's supposed to go. So then it comes over to this side, and it goes around this pulley right here, and this is the water pump. As a matter of fact, Miss Tone has a coolant leak from the water pump. So this is the water pump on a Chrysler, okay? And then it comes around and then goes around my belt tensioner pulley. We know that's the belt tensioner because we already moved it, but I'm going to do it again. Get that on there like that. And then I'm going to move it, and then I'm just going to loop that belt right off the crankshaft. And then we can take this belt off. Okay, so we're talking about belts right now. We're doing an alternator, but here's a belt. Serpentine belt has ribs, okay? You don't want to see any frays. It's starting to fray right here. You can see that's part of the fabric. So a little bit's okay. If you saw like a lot, then that would be problematic, okay? Turn it over. You want to bend it. If you see cracks inside on the ribs, then that would be another indication. So check in a couple places. Alright, so now let's refer to the poster. I'm not a big fan of posters because my students never look at them or read them, but the posters are there because they represent what you're supposed to do or know in the shop, okay? So this is a belt wear indicator, so it sits inside the belt, and if it's a good belt, it will be above it and you could feel this. If it sits down inside, then the belt is worn. And so here's an example of what I was just talking about of a frayed belt or a cracked belt, which this belt doesn't look like these, okay? They could be glazed, and if they're glazed, then they're causing a squealing sound. So look for the glazing. That's a real problem with serpentine belts. Earlier we talked about the belt routing and the belt tensioner. So this is a different type of belt tensioner where you just use the drive to a breaker bar or ratchet, stick it right inside there, and then you can move this pulley off of the belt and take the belt off the crankshaft, the air conditioning, the alternator, and the power steering. So let's go ahead and try this. Okay, I'm going to take my little indicator right here, and I'm going to put that right inside, and I'm just going to put my hand across there, and I can feel it. If I wasn't able to feel it, then, and you can look at it from the side, you can see it sticking up. So if it was sticking all the way and it was completely flat, then we need to change this belt. So her belt's not making noise, it's not cracked, it's not frayed. Okay, so we're going to reuse this serpentine belt. Break that bolt free. Now you can see the fender right here where the air ratchet. It is really crucial you don't get pinched inside here. If you do, it's a real problem because you might back out the bolt all the way, and you might jam where you change direction with this switch right here. And I've seen people jam their air ratchet up inside the fender here, and they're stuck. They actually have to move the motor in order to get this out. So you got to be really careful about that. And we're going to check to see if this was part of the noise. Take that bolt out. Here's the pulley inside here, and spin it, and it feels nice and smooth. So this is not the source of the noise. Okay, that's pretty obvious. Okay. All right, so here's our alternator. We have one bolt on the bottom, one bolt at the top. Keep in mind, some alternators are where you adjust the belt. This one is not, so these are just regular bolts that hold it in. We will have wires that are connected to the back side, so walk over here. On the top. So if that alternator were to hit the motor, I'm not going to get a lot of sparks. Never do an alternator without disconnecting the battery first. You can't really break this free because of the way there's not a lot of room between the crankshaft pulley and the air conditioning pulley. So sometimes with an air ratchet, I'll spin it and stick it on. And you could hear it where it grabbed it and spun it. Now, I got this one loose. I'm not going to take it out until I get the top bolt loose, okay? So now I'm going to go all the way up to the top. And I might have to grab an extension. Oh, I get it on there. I'm going to use the same technique, okay? Okay, so this top bolt is a lot smaller than the other bolt. Matter of fact, the other bolt I think was a 15, and then this is a 13, so two sizes smaller. Really interesting that they changed the size of the bolt. All right, so I'm going to get it going, and then I'm going to stick it on. Long bolt, but you could see the technique I was talking about. When I first went on and tried to break it free, it didn't break, but then when I hit the trigger, and by hitting the trigger, getting it spinning, and then put it on the bolt, it snaps it, especially these snap-on ones. These snap-on air ratchets, they're very powerful. They do bust your knuckles a lot by jamming your knuckles when they kick. But man, you get it lined up with the bolt, you stick it on when it's spinning, and it'll break the threads free. Get that bolt out. All right, so we got that both the bolts off. Now we can just spin this off. And you can see it's kind of in a tight area. Initially I thought I could get it from the top. There's no way you can get it from the top. You have to get this from the bottom. Okay? If we come into the back side here, we come over here. All right, so the back side, here's my wires right here. So there's an easy connector to disconnect by just pushing this little button here. There's going to be another wire that's part of the battery, okay, which is right here. So behind this little cover, I just pinched it. Here's that little bolt. If I did not have the battery disconnected, okay, and it hit this air conditioning line, you would burn a hole in the air conditioning and Freon would go everywhere. That actually happened with a wrench with a student in the shop about 8 years ago. They were wrenching on the alternator, and the wrench hit the AC line, and immediately the area filled up with Freon. Okay, so you got to disconnect the negative cable, and it feels like it's just a 13, so I want to go get that. Okay, so a 1/4 inch ratchet is what you want to use for this job. Those bolts aren't real tight, and it's a real tight area, so a 1/4 inch drive ratchet with a 1/4 inch drive shallow socket, and it's a 13 millimeter. Put that on, and this should be my last bolt to remove this alternator. So now I got the fun job of fishing this out, and it looks like I'm going to fish it out where the camera's at right now. So we can't get this alternator off, so we're going to take off the air conditioning compressor. So I'm going to go right up here. There's 3 bolts. Get that bolt. 2. Get that bolt. And I need to make sure that I don't have my head underneath here in case this alternator falls. And 3. Oh, I almost did what I was talking about. You saw the air ratchet going into the fender. That's when these things get jammed. You got to be real careful of that. You can mess up the bolt. You can make a situation where you can't actually remove things. So now I could drop that air compressor out of the way, and that should give me enough room to get my alternator out. And this is the source of the noise, I hope. It is discolored in the front. You look at the back, it's not as discolored, but in the front it's discolored. So the front of this definitely got hot.
Solid alternator pulleys have been replaced by a patented pulley technology that is an important part of the drive system design. These new high-tech pulleys allow the belt to power the alternator during acceleration and cruising speed, but decouple or disengage from the alternator during engine deceleration. During rapid deceleration, the rotating mass of the alternator works against the force of the engine deceleration and continues to power the system forward. This puts extra strain on the belt and the tensioner and requires higher belt tension to keep the belt from slipping. In 1999, the more advanced overrunning alternator decoupler pulley. These pulleys allow for the alternator to freewheel or coast during deceleration. They lock in one direction to power the alternator, but turn freely in the other. Using a screwdriver, remove the plastic cap. The cap can be removed by pushing the screwdriver through the center and prying up, or by placing the screwdriver in the cap groove. With the cap removed, look at the design of the ADP center and determine which tool configuration fits the pulley being tested. With a calibrated torque wrench, insert the proper tool in the shaft and rotate in both directions. Both type of decoupler pulleys will rotate freely and smoothly in one direction and lock in the opposite direction. The OAD design will have a spring feel. If the shaft spins in both directions or slips in the drive direction under load, then immediate replacement is required. Of course, if the ADP does not spin freely and smoothly in the opposite direction or overrun direction, it must be replaced. If the OAD pulley has no spring feel in the drive direction or requires more than 9 to 13 inch-pounds or 1 to 1.5 newton meters to turn in the overrun direction, it should be replaced. Another test would be to remove the ADP cap and look for any metal shavings. If metal shavings are present, this indicates an internal failure. The ADP needs to be replaced.
Okay, so here's our ADP. It said to hit the cap. Alright, so now you take the screwdriver, and there you go. There's your evidence, okay? See all the rust, okay? So this is a decoupler pulley, and we got excessive shavings, metal shavings, rust. There's your problem. And you could see inside here, it's just gone. So we found the source of our noise. I haven't really talked about how I diagnosed the alternator that was on the Chrysler Sebring. These are all the things I have available to me. First and foremost is your hands. Whenever you have a vibration problem, you could trace it by grabbing things, and your hand is very sensitive to vibrations. But we have all these special tools at our access. So this one's kind of like a PCV pipe. You can listen to it, but you can just take a regular pipe, hold it up to your ear, and listen for the sound and focus in on where that sound's coming from. We had chassis ears, which we could put up to 6 channels, clip on, can't be on any moving parts, and we can listen to each channel individually using the chassis ears. What I use for this diagnosis, I use the stethoscope, and I actually stuck it as close to the pulley as I could right here, and I put this on the power steering pump. I put this on near the idler pulleys, near the belt tensioner pulley, and over by the water pump. And where I got the most noise was right here on the alternator, and I could really focus on that vibration. But I could have easily done it with just a screwdriver using my hand to cover my ear. I could have done it that way. A pry bar, same thing. Take your hand at the end, cup it, and put it on your ear and start touching things. To help focus on on an engine compartment where the noise is coming from, sometimes you just want to use a tube, and that tube will guide you to where the noise is focused on. So a regular tube would work, PCV pipe. These are hood props that we use to hold the hoods up. I could have just stuck my hand at the end and used this and get down to where I can't put my hand. And the alternator was actually in a place where you really couldn't stick your hand down there. So I used the stethoscope, but I could easily use something long like this. So just a good assortment of different ways to find vibrations and noises. And the hardest ones are any rotational noise, any vibration caused by rotation. Could be an axle shaft, could be a drive shaft. In this case, it was the ADP pulley, the decoupler pulley for the alternator, and you could see the discoloration and the metal that came out the front. Always read the caution before you return this part to the store. Please call. We have factory trained ASE technicians who are waiting to help. So I am a factory ASE technician, so I'm not going to make that phone call. I am going to do what you should do, and that is match everything on your about your alternator. You don't want to start installing it without first making sure that the ADP pulley, the decoupler pulley, is exactly the same width, okay, same diameter. If it's not the same width this way and not the same diameter, you wouldn't want to put it in, and it looks identical to me. Bolt holes are identical, so that looks good. Now we got to pay attention to the wiring. I'm going to get it in the same position, and look at this. There's a special dowel too, and the dowel's in the right position because this could really fight you trying to get it into the car if this is not in properly. So, and then we have the battery cable post right here, okay? And then we want to make sure that the voltage regulator connector is exactly the same. It has 2 pins inside. Same where it clicks on right here is exactly the same. We're good. We could use this alternator. Okay, so going back to the dowel, I just noticed this dowel is pressed in, a little bit different than this. It's a little bit more shallow. This one right here, there's a little recess and it's not all the way through. So I'm actually going to take it to a vise and I'm going to hammer this down so it's flush. So then we're sticking out of the casing the same distance. So I'm going to measure this, I'm going to measure this, and then I'm going to hit this in until it's the same. Okay, so I'm going to use a vernier dial caliper, and I'm going to just measure that. It looks like we're just under 20 millimeters. Okay, so the 20, and I'm at 85 and a half. So let's go ahead and go to this side. And I'm a little over 20 here. Okay, so what I said was right, is this is not fully seated inside, so we need to hit it with a hammer. Alright, so I don't want to compromise the arm here where the dowel goes through, so you need to properly support that. And I'm going to hit it down until it's flush. There we go, we already bottomed out, and you can see that I'm bottomed out right there. And I felt it go in, you could hear it go in, so now let's measure it. So I'm going to put it back where it was over here. Take my vernier caliper here, expand it, contract it, and look at that. That's going to be plenty good. There we go. 85, just under 20. If it was at the 0, then we would be at 20 millimeters exactly. Okay, so we're taking a bolt inventory, and I forgot I had some bolts in my pocket, which is a rookie mistake. This is an interesting bolt. I've never seen this design. It's like a cradle bolt. So when you put the alternator in, I was like a cradle, and then put this bolt in, tighten this, and then we tighten the bottom one. We made sure we got the right bolts in our air compressor here. So we checked our bolts here. So it's a good idea to have a plan with your bolts. Identify what bolts go where, because they're specific. You couldn't take this bolt, put it anywhere else. You couldn't take this bolt, put it anywhere else. They all go in the same place. Slide this in. Put it right on top of our air compressor here. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and do my bolt, my nut for my battery first. So you always want to put the electrical on an alternator before you ever install it. Okay. So I'll put that on. And I'm making sure that it locks into the place that it's supposed to lock into. And these don't have to be tight. Too many people over tighten the cable on the back side of the alternator. Just snug. Now I take my little voltage regulator cable or wire, get that lined up properly inside here. Give it a little, I heard it click, but I'm always going to pull on it this way to make sure it's properly seated. Alright, so we got that crater bolt, get that lined up inside there. There we go, and then we're going to just move this straight up to the top. Get this top bolt started. The top bolt at least 2 to 3 turns because we don't want to strip it. This one's already started because it's a cradle bolt. Go up to the top bolt. Already changed the direction of the ratchet. Perfect. Bottom bolt. Here we go. Put it on. Get ready for the kick. We're good. Happy with that top bolt with the ratchet, so I'm actually going to use a snap-on flex head. Make sure I'm going tight, and I want to give a little more torque to that top bolt. There we go. And then I'm just going to make sure that bolt's tight, and it is. Those snap-on air wraps are really strong, and most of the time I'm good with that. I wasn't happy with how it felt, so that's why I just made sure. So now I'm put the air conditioning compressor on, and I should tell you, if you're a rookie mechanic, it wouldn't hurt for you to read the process on how to do an alternator before you do it. I could look at something and I go, okay, this is the way I'm going to go after it. Okay, but it's not always that easy. So, I mean, before, when we started, I would never have guessed I would have had to take off this AC compressor. But after I got started and was trying to manipulate the alternator out, I had no choice. And I didn't want to remove the power steering pump, so instead of going from the top, I went from the bottom. So, good idea to wiggle and jiggle to get things started. Those two have started. The top one's fighting me a little bit. So I need to move the air compressor around. There we go. See, and that would be an area where a rookie mistake would be you just try to start it and you don't know to wiggle and jiggle. You don't pay attention to how that's feeling on your fingers. You know if a bolt is being cross-threaded just by the way it feels. And that's the hardest part about teaching automotive, is knowing the difference of what thread should feel like versus cross-threading and versus alignment, knowing how to get this properly aligned. Okay, so I got all the bolts started properly. Now it's just a matter of tightening them. Good. 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 And you know, the air ratchets, great tool. If you were to do this with just regular hand tools, this would be a really difficult job, because this allows you to not have to ratchet, but just stick it on the bolt and pull a trigger. Just be aware it will kick when it tightens. So now we got our idler pulley, and I'm gonna make sure that's started by hand properly. Get my ratchet on there. Make sure it spins. We're good. Okay, I'm happy with that. Okay, so the belt was a struggle. It took us 2 tries, and then we're like, just go look it up. So I went and looked up the proper routing of the belt. Okay, so there's actually 8 pulleys according to this. So it's really twisted. I got my hand on it right now. We're ready to put it on. I'm going to close the video out with how to look up the Serpentine belt routing. Okay. All right, so I never took off my belt tensioning tool, because if I did, then that belt tensioning pulley would rock it back further than I want. So I just left that tool on there the whole time. Now I just turn that, slide that over that idler pulley. We did end up changing the idler pulley. I didn't realize the customer had that pulley with her. And then just let that back in. And we got that pulley, that belt on. Now here's the thing. You don't want to assume that it's all right. You need to go and feel with your hand that it's properly seated on every pulley. If you don't have it, they could get off on a rib or two. So you want to make sure with your hand that it's seated into every pulley properly and not hitting anything, okay? Don't assume that it's aligned right. Make sure with your hand by feeling. I'm gonna put my battery cable back on. Because of where this battery is located, it is the positive cable that I disconnected. 99% of the time, you're never gonna do the positive cable. Reason why is if this ratchet were to hit this bracket, I would get sparks. So that's why I'm doing really short strokes, and I'm not making sure I'm not touching anything, because you never really want to do the positive cable, always the negative cable. So if this ratchet hits the metal, it wouldn't produce any sparks of any kind. And we need to rev it too. All right, so you heard it before, and now you hear it after. So that alternator is right there with the ADP decoupler pulley. Everything's working quietly. Customer's going to be happy. Look down here, you can see the crankshaft pulley, the air conditioning pulley. So I'm okay now putting the cover back on here and putting the wheel back on here. I'm not going to make a video of putting the cowling on and the wheel on. So I'm happy with my repair. Alright, so I am a ASE Master Technician, and the shop is NATEF accredited program, and when we did our NATEF accreditation, this was a required tool. It's a belt tensioning tool. So I'm going to model it right now. So you push on it, you hook on the hook right here onto the belt, and then you let it snap back in, and then you read the gauge. So let's go ahead and do this. I'm going to stick that right onto the belt, that hook. Get that right on there. See? And then you're going to let it snap back. And then this is your arrow right here, and it's right on a used belt right here. So this would be an indicator on a stretched belt or a bad belt tensioner, and so her tensioner doesn't need to be replaced. So my big thing on this is what the industry wants us to teach. It's a belt tensioning tool. I was a mechanic of 30 years, never used this. What I used was my fingers. Sense of feel. I grab that belt should move a ½ inch up and down. And I guarantee you, my calibrated hands are much more accurate than this tool.